My name is David Doyel. It is May 11th, 2023. I'm coming to you from the home of Paul and Susie Fish in Tucson, Arizona. I grew up in Central California in a very small rural farm town and grew up working in the fields and in agriculture. And I went to college in Northern California at a place called California State University, Chico. I got 3 degrees from there. I got a BA, MA, and teaching credential. And I had a couple of archaeologists on the faculty there. Matter of fact, my committee members, who were very influential in my career as an archaeologist. And my chairman, Makoto Koda, was really, I think, I probably learned more from him than about any other person. But so they put me on a good footing, and I transferred. I actually came out to Arizona to attend the University of Arizona Archaeological Field School at Grasshopper, kind of almost on a lark. And of course, Bill Longacre was running the field school at the time, and that was 1971. That's actually where I met the woman who would become my wife, who is still my wife. And Bill, it turns out the field school was kind of a recruiting station for U of A grad students. And there must have been, I don't know, 6 or 8 of us from that field school who ended up in the Ph.D. program in Tucson. And that is to the credit of Bill Longacre. And so I arrived, I had a master's degree, and I was tired of student loans, and I really wanted to be a field archaeologist. I just really loved field work, and I learned that from my experience in California. So I started working for the Arizona State Museum almost immediately, doing surveys and excavations, and that was kind of my career at the U of A. I would work, run a project, I'd get back and I'd do a semester of grad school, and that's kind of the way it went through the 70s. I talked Emil Haury into being my chair. He was winding down his career at the time. And I had this wonderful committee of, I had 3 generations of archaeologists. Doc was my chair. I had Gwen Vivian, otherwise known as Mr. Chaco. And I had Jeff Reed, who had just recently finished his PhD at U of A. So I had this great committee representing like three different generations of archaeology, and they had kind of very different approaches to my dissertation, which I won't elaborate on. But I was very fortunate that at U of A at the time, you also had to have a minor. You had to have a major and a minor. So my minor at the time was what we call cultural ecology. And I was fortunate to I had Bob Netting. Robert Netting is one of the foremost cultural ecologists at the time. And Bunny Bernard Fontana, who was an ethnologist with the State Museum at the time, and they were my minor. So I had this wonderful committee that I have great memories of. And then I continued to do field work. I finished my degree. I did another project or 2 for the State Museum before I left town. I still was oriented towards doing field work, doing field archaeology, but I had an opportunity. I was hired to direct the fledgling archaeology program for the Navajo Nation. And we went up there sometime in the late 90s. That was a baptism by fire. It absolutely was. We had huge, I think at one time I had as many as like 200 employees in this program, mostly Navajo. And we'd hire local guys, local people, wherever we were doing projects on the reservation. But I was kind of a small town kid, and I learned a lot of lessons on the Navajo and politics and how to get things done and how you make connections and how do you communicate when you speak different languages. And the Navajo was a real interesting experience, plus the fact that I ran a long-term project outside of Chaco Canyon that ended up with I don't know how many volumes of reports. And we were excavating a large Chacoan outlier called Bissaani just right outside Escavada, I think. No, it was right on the Escavada. So that was a wonderful experience, and we worked mainly with local Navajos, but the project was directed by a well-known archaeologist in New Mexico, Mike Marshall. And I didn't have to worry too much. Mike kind of ran it. But anyway, that was a wonderful experience getting me involved in Chacoan archaeology, and which lasted for a while. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to continue my focus on Chaco. And then I was called back to Phoenix, and I got heavily involved in contract archaeology. By that time, early 80s, contract archaeology was very big. And I forgot to mention that in the 70s at U of A, I was in on the early end of the contract cultural resource management program. And I had a lot of opportunities, which were wonderful. And so by that time, after I left Navajo, CRM had been developing for a good 10 years or more. So I ran a program in Phoenix and did a number of projects there. Like they were involved in urban renewal and lots of things going on in the Phoenix metro area. But then I had this opportunity. I've always been interested in museums and museology. And I've directed 3 museums in my career. And I had an opportunity to be the city archaeologist and the director of Pueblo Grande for the city of Phoenix. And that must have been probably early 80s, I suppose. And that was, again, it started off as kind of a big lesson in city politics. But how do you get things done in a big bureaucracy that doesn't particularly have any interest in some old archaeological site and a struggling little museum? But we were able to get a lot done, and we developed a big bond, they would call it a bond issue, which was passed, and we got several $1 million to enhance Pueblo Grande and the ruin. And that's when you go there today, you see the results of that grant that we were able to get. And so that was, but I was really interested in the kind of museum, exhibit, education aspect of it too, not just the city archaeology program. And we would do rotating exhibits at least every year, and that's when we got involved in consulting with the local native communities, and actually statewide, like Navajos and O'odham and Yaqui and Hopi. And we were one of the first museums that actually built in consultation with native tribes as a part of our exhibit planning program. So I'm very proud of that. And we had some fun exhibits, and of course then Pueblo Grande was known for the famous Indian market, which we developed and enhanced. And so I was there, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. And then I had an opportunity to go back north again to the San Juan and become the director for the Salmon Ruins Archaeological Park, which I did for a while, and we were able to do some good things there, and it kind of got me back into Chaco, but it wasn't really a long-term job for me. So then I bounced back to the Phoenix area, which is pretty much, I think, where I've been since, and got involved in contract archaeology again. And then, let's see, I actually decided, for a couple of reasons, I was a little tired of contracting, but you know, you get to a point where you're 40 years old or whatever, and you think, what about my future? And contract archaeology still has this issue. They're not very good for benefits. They're better. But back at the time, it was very difficult to get good benefits. And if you want to think about things like healthcare and retirement especially. So I decided maybe I'd try something different. And so I took a job with the federal government, with the U.S. Air Force on the Barium Goldwater Range, southwest of Phoenix. And that is where, I think after 8 or 9 years, is where I finished up my my official career and retired. But although I've been very active since. I always saw myself as a field archaeologist. And this goes all the way back to when I took my first archaeology dig class in California. I thought, I can be outside. I can be doing something that's intellectually stimulating. And I thought, yeah, this is interesting because I had been involved in social science and teaching and whatever. And so that kind of turned me to archaeology. And from the beginning, and especially when I got to Tucson, I wanted to do field work. And I did a lot of the major field work for the State Museum in the 70s. And that's kind of, and frankly, I think I was really pretty good at it, but one of my strengths is I'm a very good organizer and getting things set up for people to do their jobs and how do you, and kind of communicating with contractors and subcontractors and specialists and I kind of enjoyed managing that process. But one thing I did want to say, and I think this might be unique, that I have performed in about every governmental context in archaeology. So I have been a tribal archaeologist, a county archaeologist, a state archaeologist, and a federal archaeologist. So I've kind of somehow managed to, and it wasn't by design, it just sort of kind of was the way it worked out. And kind of, I feel like I obviously survived, but was able to impact some of the bureaucracies along the way. And, you know, archaeology is not central to any bureaucracy that I'm aware of. And so you're trying to make inroads and educate people and enhance your budgets and educate people. And you know, those were all challenges, but they're satisfying in the end. I directed in my career 3 small museums. And one thing I should also say in the history of archaeology, I was really impressed with the old model of Harold Colton, William Fulton, Emil Haury. The idea was a museum was an educational device, institution. So, but archaeology and education were combined. So you go out and you do some archaeological research, do a project, you come back and you do an exhibit. That's what Charlie Di Peso did on Casas Grandes. That's what these guys did, you know, back in the day. And they were, I started to say they were kind of all small museums, but certainly the State Museum wasn't. I really like that model. And that's what I tried to kind of implement in some of the places that I went, but it just, the administrative structure just wasn't there any longer. And that model is kind of gone from what I see in the state of Arizona anyways. I, as a student, as a history of archaeology, have benefited from having a major professor like Emil Haury. You know, Emil had started out in the 30s and he knew all the stories from, I mean, back to Kidder and we got to listen to all those stories around the campfire when we'd go out with Haury to Laner or Point of Pines, and I hope that kind of stuff is happening now because it was just wonderful. I mean, we got to sleep overnight in one of Joe Ben Wheat's pit houses, you know, and I think that if you're really into the archaeology, that's something very special. And so I've gotten back into some of the history of archaeology, and I've written papers on various people like Charlie Di Peso, but I think our archive is going to be becoming even more valuable in the future. I have not gone through all the correspondence, but speaking strictly from the Haury file, you know, there is this talk that Di Peso and Haury were, you know, not enemies necessarily, but there was an ongoing competition, shall I say. And I invited Di Peso to the Salado conference in '76, which Haury and I organized. I invited him to the '78 SAA session that Fred Plog and I organized. So Charlie, you know, was from Chicago, but he was infatuated with the West. And he came out here, one of the reasons he was out here was for the war. He was stationed at, what was the name of the field out, Chandler. He taught, he was a pilot. and he had some physical problem, but he never went over to a campaign or in the theater as they call it, but he was here, and that's how he met Odd Halseth. He actually worked at Pueblo Grande, and then through that he met Haury, and I think he was very enamored, and he was very solicitous. But in these letters, it's like, try to find back and forth over it. This is when Charlie was running up to grad school in his early career. It's all positive. I mean, what you see from the correspondence is this growing relationship. Haury was very respectful, you know, in everything he wrote. So was Di Peso. And I'm looking for an issue. I'm just saying, where is the letter where I can say, aha, you know, these guys are really at it. I haven't found it, you know, but it's out there. I mean, that's the kind of social memory that Di Peso and Haury were at it. And I'll never forget at the Salado conference in '76, Haury very politely sat there and just ripped Charlie one side, down the other. You know, like, I don't believe you, Charlie. Where are you coming at? What, you know, where's your, you know, just, but very politely. And Charlie sat there and nodded his head and thank you, Doc, for your comments. You know, it was all in very polite. And I think that was the generation. You know, it wasn't like Benford publicly calling someone an asshole, you know, or whatever goes for dialogue these days. It was a different time, and so I think that's important point to make, that what you see, what's in writing in the files versus what's in the social memory out there, and I don't know how much it's interesting to me anyway, and I haven't finished that project, so that was just a story. One of the things that's changed a lot is the consultation process. So I thought it was very odd, for example, on the Navajo in 1979, the Navajos were not even consulted on the significance of archaeological sites. They had no role in the BIA permitting process. I thought this was very odd. You know, I mean, it's the Indians, it's their land, you know, it's their history. And so, you know, whenever I could have anything to say about it, you know, we needed to incorporate more of the native voices into archaeology. What does it mean to them? What would they like to see done? And more of that kind of going forward into the future. And that's what we try to do at the museums I directed, was to involve the tribes in helping us tell their story. You know, whether it was the Zuni or the Hopi or the O'odham. And we were fortunate that the Arizona Humanities Council at the time had a very progressive leadership. And we were able to get small grants to pay consultants to come in and help us with our exhibit programs. And so the consultation process has continued to grow, and now it's more or less internalized into every level of government. Although having been involved in that with the U.S. Air Force for a number of years, it's become a little, I feel like, in my opinion, it's become a little kind of bureaucratic, and it's hard to communicate directly with individuals because people kind of have to assume positions. There's the tribal position on this, there's the federal position on this, there's whatever other position. And it's hard to just kind of relax and talk about what do you think, kind of, because the meetings are normally very formal, and there's an agenda. And I remember, especially with the Air Force, talking to them about there's a certain style that tribal groups prefer that's not necessarily compatible with what the military thinks. So that was kind of a challenge along the way, but I think it's become a little better. But, you know, for example, the Air Force, they did have to do one day a year, the general at Luke would go down and meet with the chairman of the Tohono O'odham tribe, or the chairman of the TO would come up to loop to meet with the general. That was the only acknowledgement that the 1,000,000 acres carved out for Goldwater was actually ODOM territory. And 90% of the sites that we were dealing with were Native American and not historic. And so, there were some interesting issues we got involved along those lines. But I think the process has become a little more smoothed out, and people are a little more willing to tell us what they really think about their history and a particular site. And so that was some of the things I was involved in. So we had all that history, that academic background and research orientation and just the weight of the institution behind us doing this work. So then you get out and you're running a private for-profit contracting program, and you realize that all that is missing. There is no academic support, no academic background, no academic values. You're kind of on your own out there. And I personally kind of wanted to maintain the relationships with the universities and the professors. And for one thing, they needed to do a better job of training the students I was hiring, which I talked to a few people about. But that is one of the biggest things I've noticed, and I've even sensed with younger people I've talked to, that they're kind of out there on their own. There is no this institutional history where you feel the history. I mean, I could go up and talk to Doc Haury about 30 years ago. What did you do out there, and what did it mean, and what do you think I should do? And or anybody, just pick a name. And the modern contracts, it's run mostly as a business. It is a big business now, millions and millions of dollars, and the profits are going to the owners. So it's and there's not all of them really encourage research. So that to me is kind of a continuing challenge. That how do you try to keep values that you learned in grad school and you learned about research and making a contribution and making it available to the public, and how do you maintain those values in this private, mostly for-profit kind of work environment? It's very interesting that being in on the early end of contract archaeology, I got hit head on by irate managers and project directors who, it was their job to get their job done. And then all of a sudden there's this thing about archaeology. And I could tell a variety of stories about hitting that kind of head on, and I would have to sit down and explain it and listen to the oftentimes negative noise coming from some of these people. And so there was a real learning curve for probably both sides, that we had to learn how to talk to the business people and the corporations, and they had to learn from us, because the law was not going to go away. So that there was just kind of like there was clear transition with the natives, that there was a learning curve, and that lasted well over a decade. Could have even been 70s, 80s, that time period, when everybody was having to learn from everybody else. And and some corporations were more amenable to they saw this as good for their public image. Some corporations kind of just didn't want to have to deal with it. So there was you get a wide range of responses, and I suspect that some of the issues I'm talking about here are still with us today. I'm no longer doing contract archaeology, haven't for years, but I suspect some of these issues are still with us. One of the things I want to say about Hohokam is, when I got to Tucson, no one other than Emil Haury was even thinking about Hohokam. And we had one site, which was Snaketown, which hadn't even been published. The second excavation hadn't even been published yet. So I could see that, and most of my cohort group, my colleagues and peers, they all were interested in the north. And it was like the old thing, nobody wanted to work in the hot desert except Emil Haury, which is one of the reasons why he became my chair. He was the guy. And so I say, here's this whole big field we know very little about, this whole region. And it kind of harkens back a little bit to my youth, where I grew up in agriculture and working in the fields, picking cotton and irrigating. And I'm thinking, I got to the desert and I'm thinking, these people created this irrigation society, very complicated, built hundreds of miles of canals, all in a Neolithic context. I mean, and it lasted for 1,500 years. How did they do this? I was fascinated. And I thought, everybody else can go work up north, and I'll start doing the contracts in the south. And then when more projects started coming in, and I started working with more peers, and thankfully people like David Wilcox, David Gregory, we became known as the Three Daves. We interacted an awful lot on our projects, and that made it a lot more fun. And then it just kind of grew from there. And another thing about when we came through, it was an era of big archaeology. So we were doing big field projects. Think of Gregory's excavations of Las Colinas, which was probably one of the biggest. And actually, my dissertation project at Escalante was one of the biggest in the history of the State Museum at the time. And so there was just an awful lot of excitement. And other people would come, younger people like Dave Abbott, Dave Phillips, joined the group. We had, I think, 7 Daves at one time working for the State Museum. And it was a very exciting time to be in Hohokam archaeology. And I recognized one of the biggest problems was we knew very little about the organization of Hohokam sites. How are they organized? What are the spatial patterns out there? Are there governing principles involved? Because at the time, people who had done work like Wasley and some of the previous generation thought the Hohokam sites were just kind of random scatterings of features and houses, and our work showed that absolutely was not the case. So in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we worked on, and I did a number of books on what we called site structure and organization, where we were learning about how Hohokam sites were organized through their 1,500-year sequence. And Wilcox's work at Snaketown was obviously very critical in that. And I mean, Wilcox found patterns in the records that had escaped Doc Haury, because Doc had a lot of other stuff to address. So that was exciting. And every time we'd go in the field, it was exciting because we were going to learn something new. And I think that the process of discovery to me in the field was probably one of the most exciting aspects that I enjoyed. I knew every time I went out, we were going to find something new, we were going to learn something new and potentially significant, which a lot of it was. And at the time, in the 70s and 80s, there was very little known about southern and central Arizona archaeology. So I'm happy I was able to contribute to the growing knowledge and database of the region. Yeah, I am one of the fortunate people who've worked pretty much across the Southwest, and having directed a big project outside of Chaco Canyon and all the work I did in southern Arizona. And I thought about that somewhat in terms of clearly different kinds of organization, different kinds of institutions. And I remember we had a symposium that Patty Crown and Jim Judge organized in Santa Fe in, I think, '87, which was called Chaco Hohokam. And they invited Chaco scholars and Hohokam scholars. And I was the only one of the 8 people there, I think, 10 people, who had actually worked in both areas. And Lynn Sebastian, very well-known New Mexico archaeologist, former SHPO and Chaco scholar, told me that I needed to think about that more, that not many people were doing that, to have that kind of close-up, firsthand knowledge of two very, very different regions and culture histories. And I never got around to getting back to that. I think it's a fascinating topic. I think it needs to be done. I think we need more Chaco-Hohokam kind of interaction because it has become kind of Balkanized, and you're either a Pueblo archaeologist. I was introduced routinely up there as a Hohokam archaeologist. I wasn't a Southwestern archaeologist, which is how I introduced myself. And so there was some of that, and it's become even, I don't know, if possible, even more Balkanized. That there's not that much interaction, which I think there really needs to be on a higher level of synthesis in the Southwest. Of course, I was involved in archaeology as a career in what some people would call applied archaeology. I was never an academic archaeologist, which is actually what I aspired to do, and ended up not doing that. So I had to create other opportunities for myself, and I think, as I already mentioned, one thing that I actually am sort of sad about is the divorce of archaeology from an academic environment. And this is an old issue now, but to me, it's still a dominant theme in what's happening in CRM, is that for-profit, private archaeology as a business kind of model, as opposed to the old academic. You want to learn things, you want to do some research, and those things are still, I think, very big issues as we go forward. And another thing I always tell students, regardless of the brand of archaeology you're in, if you're interested in archaeology, you're not going to make a lot of money. And one of my professors told me that at the early end. He said it's a very interesting life, but don't expect to get rich. And in this day and age where everything is expensive and it takes a lot of money to live, and that students, and I tell them that you got to have it kind of in your blood. It makes a big difference. You know, if it gets in your blood, it's in your system, you do it because you want to do it. You love to do that. This is what you want to do. Becomes almost a mission. And if you don't have that, and if you're only looking for a job, then you're probably going to be disappointed. I'm kind of uncertain about the future because I do see it going more in the way of big business, field archaeology. There are still a lot of what we call mom and pop shops around, but a lot of it has gone to big corporate, again, for-profit kind of work. And I don't understand. I don't see how there's going to be any rapprochement, or any getting back together to marry the academic versus the contract archaeology positions. I don't know how that's going to happen. I wish that companies would have more relationships with universities and somehow share ideas, methods. But I don't see much of that going on these days, and I'm 10 years, 15 years removed from the business, but I'm not sure where it's going. I was very happy that the U of A finally started a master's program in what I think they call applied archaeology, sometime 10, 15 years ago. And I remember thinking, well, God, I wish they'd had that 50 years ago. I had to learn on the fly. But at least now students have the opportunity to go on that track with more of an applied archaeology kind of thing. So I think that it was good for academia to kind of wake up and say, this is a part of the future. We need to do more to give our students opportunities to better themselves in that kind of environment. So I think that was a positive thing. I can say that one of the things about contracts is you don't have the opportunity to choose what you're going to do. You have a contract. This is what's in front of you. So your challenge is to organize and come up with questions and create a framework. I would call it a work plan, a research framework, to make that project interesting. So you're not just doing a job. You're going to want to make this project contribute to the larger body of archaeological research. Now, not all managers think that way, but that was sort of my approach. And you wonder if there could be some sort of interaction where we know that academic archaeologists can pretty much go wherever they want to go to work, and contract archaeologists cannot. They have to work in a particular area on a particular job. You know, you think there could be some kind of interaction between the academics and the contract people that somehow complement each other. I'm not sure I've seen a whole lot of that, but that might be one opportunity to where they could work more closely together and maybe even share some of the same questions about what they're doing, questions they're asking in the field. That would be one possible opportunity. Yeah, so the 70s were pretty much the heyday of contract archaeology at the State Museum. Of course, they no longer have a program. But there was a lot of money, there were a lot of projects, a lot of interesting people. And that's one of the things I wanted to say about archaeology. I think it's fascinating because you do meet so many interesting people from diverse backgrounds. But we had, there was David Wilcox, who really didn't run big projects. He was more of a specialist. But he did his restudy of Snaketown, and he did his study of Casa Grande and ball courts. He wasn't really a project manager. He was kind of more of a lone wolf scholar. But Gregory and I were both out running big projects, and we had a lot of interaction. And there, as I mentioned, other people followed behind us. And then at some point, the contract program folded. But I have kind of wondered, as I see modern archaeology is really scattered. And a lot of the people, I should say some people that I've trained through the years are out very involved in running programs. But I don't see much in the way of integration. Part of what's going on now is there's simply not that many big projects, or the big projects are not being advertised or published. But I have kind of wondered who's going to be coming next, because I don't see names. I don't see people rallying around specific names at conferences like this is the next big idea, or these people are really on to what's next in Hohokam or Southwestern Archaeology. I haven't, and maybe it's because I'm a little more removed, but I haven't seen that. I wonder about that. And people really aren't talking about, okay, we're going to put together a volume on this topic at an SA meeting, and we're going to publish it. If you look, a matter of fact, I was in Portland, and I gave a paper on Hohokam archaeology, and specifically on pottery production, and somebody came up and said, it was so great to hear a paper on Hohokam. I mean, we're not hearing anything about Hohokam anymore. And that's kind of gets to my feeling that you kind of wonder what's kind of coming next, and whatever the next big thing is. And I've been retired, close to 10 years now, and I'm still very active. It's kind of the normal thing of I'm still, well, actually, one term I have used is I'm batting cleanup, like in baseball. I'm cleaning up all of these things, the projects that have been kind of hanging around that I was not able to write, to finish, still giving papers at conferences. Just got back from Portland, the SAA, where I gave another paper, and I could go into that topic, but I'm still very active in that. Still thinking about, what's next, and I still have my to-do list that I'm working on, and yeah, it's attractive since we're fairly comfortable financially to have the opportunity to do kind of more or less what I want to do, and I realized that I'm kind of at the end of my do list, and I'm thinking, oh, gee, what am I going to do next? So that's kind of an interesting. I kind of thought I would never get through my do list, but I'm kind of at that point, thinking, okay, I've been doing this for about 50 years. Kind of what do I want to do next? So I'm actually thinking about that now.